Hi, this is Tessa, and today I thought we'd try something a little bit different with my 20 with Tessa. There was a question to Goons, which is the Guild of One Name Studies forum, and it came from Brian Horridge, whose research has been UK focused, and now he's starting to look at USA based records to continue his study, or as we like to call it, jumping the pond or crossing the pond. In this instance, somebody is going the other way. They're going from UK to the USA. Now, something I have been working on is working with USA Census records, and that's going to be a future 20 with Tessa, showing you how I work with those records, how I download them, how I put them into an Excel spreadsheet. And then how I work with doing my research for family reconstruction. But at this point, I thought we'd take a really quick look at how to get started with USA-based research if it's something you're not familiar with. Now, the first thing that Brian mentioned was that he took a look at the Guild's wiki pages on USA sources, and that is an excellent start to use the wiki that's already familiar to you, in this case the Guild wiki, and then move on to some of those outline resources. And what I did was I responded, and I'm showing you my Gmail account that I have, but I responded to Brian as well as anyone else who is interested in doing research and suggested two items which are what I call in front of the paywall on the Ancestry website. And that is the Source, which is a guidebook to American genealogy, and the Red Book, which is American state, county, and town sources. Now, both of these books that are online at Ancestry, in front of the paywall, are earlier editions of the book. And that's fine because that gives you the basics that you need. And one other thing that I suggested to Brian was that he take a look at the FamilySearch.org website, because that's a free website and all of their information is freely available to anyone who goes on the site. I would suggest that you sign up with an account so that you can be signed in, because there's a number of new features coming online that were just announced the other day that will make your research easier and will help you when you're trying to find your sources or downloading your finds, or even keeping your searches organized. So FamilySearch.org is the primary place I'd tell people to go to and have their account. And FamilySearch has an excellent wiki which discusses various aspects of research. And you can look up the country, you can also look up states, and you can look up local areas. You can also look up record sets or data sets, as I call them. So one of those would be the US Census if you wanted to start there. Now, I gave him some information. I suggested he take a look at my 20 with Tessa videos, and I did starting a one name study from the viewpoint of a North American, because that's what I am. I'm from the United States, and I talked about the types of things that I looked at in order to determine the size of a potential study for my surname. And while I did look at the UK censuses for 1881, because that's always suggested, I also looked at the two record sets that would be the most important to me, or three when I start, and that would be where our name originates, which is in Ireland, where our name migrated to for a number of generations, which is in Newfoundland, and finally where my grandfather migrated our name and some other Keos also came, which is the United States of America. So those are a couple of ideas I'd give you right from the outset. And then Brian wrote back again. And this is one thing I really love about Gmail, and I'm sure others do this as well, is I can just follow that conversation. And he thanked me for the information, and his comment was he just really didn't even know where to start. He knows that there are Horriches, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, in the United States, and he's just not familiar with the same types of indexes. Now, I believe what he's referring to for indexes are the birth, marriage, and death indexes that are available on free birth, marriage, death indexes probably uk.org. I have the correct name on the videos that I did that are 20 with Tessa when I went and looked at the Keogh surname in that system. And I have to say hats off to UK for having those records freely available and so easily downloadable into a comma separated value document that you can then put into a spreadsheet program. That's great. And I understand that there's national registration in the UK for those types of events. However, that's not how it's done in the United States. First of all, we came late into the game of registering events such as birth, marriage, and death. Some states moved forward and did it right away when that legislation was first passed about setting up registrations, but many states didn't, and some states that did move forward, maybe the local jurisdiction didn't move forward. It appears that Americans have a real sense of doing what they want when they want, certainly in the regulatory realm. And so you'll find some records that are in excellent shape. Massachusetts is one of those states. Beautiful records, very well organized. They have an excellent archives and historical society that makes those types of records available. You'll find some other states that don't have any of that type of information, and those states will remain nameless right now. We also have the same things that happen in a number of other jurisdictions. We had a civil war, which was responsible for losing certain types of records, most specifically burned out. But those are all stories that are told and relayed in those two books that I first mentioned. For the purpose of figuring out where to start, I would say that unlike the UK, where you might want to start with birth, marriage, and death records, in the United States, I would start with the census records because you're going to get a grouped family in a specific location, and then you'll be able to look at those areas, whether that's local or state, and start seeing if you can find birth records, marriage records, that type of thing. And if you follow this family through the census records in the United States, you'll be able to trace their migration. They might start out somewhere on the East Coast with the earliest census, which is in 1790, and move their way across the country, or stop somewhere in the middle. Now, one thing I would point out is you should read about the USA censuses, because until about, I want to say 1850 or 1860, they are useful for getting information about the head of household, and they're useful for getting certain other statistical information. You will know because of the way the records were kept, if there's a spouse or if there are children of various ages, but you will not have names and you won't have any information. It's much more statistical. Hard to work with. And so at that point, once you've located a family somewhere in a particular state or in a particular jurisdiction, you're going to want to look at what I would call complementary or explanatory records, which might be birth records or marriage records. It might also be the newspaper in that particular jurisdiction, because there might be an article about a marriage or a baby being born or somebody's obituary. You might want to look at city directories or voting records, because that might provide you with some more information. But keep in mind that the vote came late for women in the United States. And so you're only going to be getting information about, and this is a sad but true part of our history, you're only going to be getting information about white males. Oftentimes, you'll get numbers of slaves, but a lot of times you won't get names early on. You also won't be getting information about the women unless you find it in newspaper types of sources. That all changes in the about 1850 to 1860 censuses that come out, which is early for us, keeping in mind we only came into existence as a country in the 1700s. And I realize that people in the UK are going to say that's so new, and yes, it is. So our records are much newer than yours. Our country is much newer than yours. And one would guess that it might be a little bit easier in one sense because we won't have as many records to go through, but it's going to be more difficult in that our records are not kept on a national level. So that's the long way of telling you that you have some work ahead of you, but I would like to point out from some answers that were received ways to start your research. Debbie Kinnett, who is in the Guild, has some excellent ideas. She mentions the ancestry maps, which is the easiest way to get an overall sense of where your surname occurs. And she mentions a couple other mapping websites, and those are on various wikis. Now, I would tell you to keep in mind the Ancestry wiki, the FamilySearch wiki, and I'd also take a look at Cindy's list, which is an individual, Cindy Howell, who has put together all types of links, and she gives an index to how to go about finding those links. So if you're looking up something, say in the state of Nebraska, you could type that in as your search. If you want to find out more about censuses, that's what you type in your search. USA censuses, something like that. So with that in mind, taking a look at the mail that came through that hopefully started to answer your question, I wanted to walk you through how you'd go about looking at this information. So let's take a quick look at some of the sites that I looked up. Now, the first site that I went to was Ancestry.com, and I have a subscription, but I do believe that all of this information, the basic information about surnames, is information that's in front of the paywall. You can get this information. I'm sure it's a teaser to get you to sign up, but if you have a subscription, a personal one, or you have a library subscription, or you just want to look up this information and get the numbers, you can do this without having a subscription. So what I did was I put in my surname, Keogh, and it gives me a basic one sentence piece of information about where the name originates. Now, as one namers, we know that we have to go beyond that, but it's one of those things that gives you a start. It also tells me that there are 94,000 documents and family trees on Ancestry.com with the surname Keogh. And this is one of those instances when I take everything with a grain of salt. I would be happy to take a look at certain types of records, the census and voter records, for instance, the marriage, birth, and death records, military, and immigration. I would probably stay away from member family trees, and this is just something I do because these trees are put on by members. It's something to take a look at, but at the beginning when I'm doing my research in a new area, whether that's the United States, Scotland, England, Ireland, what have you, I try to get a sense of the size of that surname in that country by looking at some of the basic records. And some of those basic records are the census and birth, marriage, and death records. So you can take a look at the name distribution, and you have this for the Keogh family, and I pointed this out in an earlier 20 with Tessa video. Right now we're on the United States, but I also showed it for England and Wales and Scotland. So right now we're in 1880 because that's what I would compare census information to the 1881 UK census information. I know that's used as kind of a base point for a lot of one namers when they start looking into how prevalent, I was going to say how common, but how prevalent their surname is. So in 1880, you get a sense here that in only a very few jurisdictions do you have what I would call a large number of individuals with the Keogh surname. In many instances, you have none. And in a few instances, you have this, what I would say, very small amount. And as you can see, and if you think about it, it's basically making the migration across country. And that is how people moved in the United States. You're also going to, if you can kind of put this in your head, you're going to see migration into Canada for a number of Keoghs, coming in through Canada, maybe staying a generation or two, and then coming across, and they would have done this in Vermont, and coming across the north. So you have a couple of migration patterns, and that's what you want to be looking for. And that's in 1880. Now, if we were to go back and click on 1840, that definitely tells you the case, because first of all, we don't have the westward ho movement until a little bit later. And we really have the Keoghs, the few that have coming in to New York. That's where 50% of the Keoghs appear. And if you're aware of your history at all, and this is another one of those good things when you're going to want to take a look at U.S. history, you're going to find that the Keoghs would have been coming over from Ireland in response to the devastation of the Great Hunger, the famine, and the enforced diaspora of the Irish. And those individuals would be coming into New York, and more probably they'd be coming into Canada, because the thing to keep in mind with immigration and emigration is that many of the Irish were leaving Ireland, coming into Canada because it was part of British North America. It was more expensive to come into the United States at various ports of entry, not only New York, but you have Baltimore, Philadelphia, Charleston. You have a lot of areas where people could come into the United States. But a number of them came in through Canada and then crossed over the border simply because it was cheaper and because they already had citizenship. And so there wasn't the question asked or the concern with any potential quotas or testing. So we've taken a look at 1840, and we see that there are very few Keoghs in the country. And in fact, I think the first census that I really have to worry about any kinds of numbers are in 1850 and 1860. We took a look at 1880, where we have some more movement, and the last one we have here is 1920. And you'll see that there are large numbers. They're not large for some other surnames, but they're large for the Keogh surnames. In California, we have them in Minnesota, Illinois. Stop and think, Chicago is a very ethnic city. Pennsylvania, New York, those kinds of places. Keoghs are represented in several other places, but the numbers are much smaller. So that's something to keep in mind, and this is a visual to give you a sense of the potential size of a study. Now, one other thing that I would suggest that you do, one thing I want to point out before we move on is you can view all Keogh census records here, and you can come down and look at family origin, immigration information, life expectancy, occupations, Civil War service, and a message board. So you can see if there's messages and maybe meet some friends that are in your own surname. They're asking questions, providing answers, and this might be a good place to find a co-researcher. So if we were to look up immigration information, I'm just going to show this to you quickly. It opens up what I would call an index card, and it shows you what I was basically telling you. You have a height of immigration, you have another height that comes in, but the vast majority of the immigration is coming in during the diaspora and coming in as a result of the Great Hunger. You can view Keogh immigration records just like you can view the Keogh census records. And the final one I'll show you here is you can find out some information about Civil War service. So you can find that there were 121 Keoghs that you're going to find in the military records for the Civil War. And the breakdown is about, I would say, 3/4 on the Union side and 1/4 on the Confederate side. And if you think about it, or you think about your U.S. history, this would be because most of the Keoghs at that time would have been in states like Illinois and New York and Pennsylvania, and those are very strong Union strongholds. You would have some of the Keoghs who probably would have gone into the South, and that would have been to continue their occupation, which would have been oftentimes farmers, and they would have wanted to get land when they arrived. And so they're going to be in some of the southern states like Georgia and South Carolina, and that tends to be where you found the Irish in the South at that time. And so that's kind of the breakdown. It's always helpful to try and learn a little bit of the history of the country that you're starting to do your research in so that you can get an understanding of the type of information that you're finding, why that might be. And these are just hypotheses, and then as you take a look at your history and correspond with others who are doing research, you'll be able to answer some of those questions. So that is the Ancestry site to take a quick look at. And another one, and I'll just tell you what I did, was I went in and I searched census and voter lists, and I asked for a specific name, and I asked for the 1880 census, and it gives me the results, which are 1,138 census entries, which show up with the exact name of Keogh. Now what you will find is exact name brings back Keogh when an individual has made a correction to the census entry because they say the name was incorrectly spelled, incorrectly transcribed, what have you. Keep in mind that some of these individuals are telling you that the name was spelled a certain way. This could have been because the enumerator heard the surname Keogh and spelled it K-E-H-O, which is phonetic, or K-E-H-O-E, or K-A-H-O, or I've also seen K-E-Y-H-O, Keogh. So whatever they were hearing, oftentimes that immigrant saying their name was, versus the spelling that we might use today, or versus the spelling that is used in Ireland or England or Scotland or somewhere else. Oftentimes, no one cared how the name was spelled. They sometimes couldn't spell themselves, couldn't read or write, and so they knew their name, but they didn't really care how the name was spelled. Today, oftentimes people say our name was always spelled this way, but they don't know that. So I would always take these corrections with a little bit of a grain of salt as well. There's going to be a lot of salt going around while we do this work. But this gives you a sense of the 1880 census and the results. And if you have a subscription, you're able to see the records and view the information. As you hover over it, you get this type of information, and when you go to look at the actual document, you can either abstract or transcribe it. Now, I like Ancestry.com, don't get me wrong, but there is another great site to be using, and I think people really need to think about this. And this is FamilySearch. And what I've done is I've already signed in to my account, and the reason that I do this is because it makes it very easy to use some resources that FamilySearch is always adding on to their website, which is sourcing information or a file box or things so that you can keep those documents or keep your searches. They recently said that they were introducing a download or an export feature for records. And this is something I'm very excited about because this will be similar to the download button that is in the free birth, marriage, and death indexes that makes it such a treat to work with the UK records. You don't have to copy and paste. You can download that information into a CSV file and then throw it into your spreadsheet program. But we're back to the United States Census, and as you can see, this is, I would say, kind of the gateway to doing your first work. And it gives you some key information, and it tells you that the images and the indexes are right there on FamilySearch in their historical records. It also gives you a number of links, so if you want to read more about it, and one of those links is something I mentioned, Cindy's List. Take advantage of this site. Bookmark it. Very helpful. Ancestry.com does a good job, but so does FamilySearch, of telling you what is different in each census year so that you can understand what kind of information you see and what you can do with the information. It also provides some really helpful information, historical background, census substitutes. We do have a census, it's 1890, that was destroyed. There are certain areas that were found or weren't destroyed, and then there are the veterans census that's part of the 1890 census that was not destroyed. So if you have a veteran you're going to find some information in the 1890 census, but it's such a small percentage of the total census. But they also do provide you with census substitutes, so definitely take a look at that. There were different types of schedules in addition to the population schedule. The agricultural schedule, what's entitled the defective schedules, Indian schedules, because Indians they were not citizens of the United States. They had their own citizenship, so that would have been maintained separately. And there's some manufacturing or industrial schedules. Things that you're interested in taking a look at, for instance, the slave schedules. All of these things are very helpful to take a look at, but the first thing you should be looking at is the population schedule. So this gives you, I'm just going to scroll through it really quickly, some information. Now, they do provide links to take a look and to start researching in any of the censuses you have here. And you'll note that our most recent census that was made available and is completely indexed is the 1940 census. But the other thing you're going to want to keep in mind is a number of states have censuses. Now this lists the census if you wanted to look at it by state. But also keep in mind that many states had a state census, and this would have been taken on oftentimes what I like to call the five. So if there's a 1900 census, there's going to be an 1895 and a 1905 census in particular states. Nebraska had state censuses. Washington was a territory for a long time and had territorial censuses because you needed to do a census to tell the U.S. government that you had enough people and you had enough voting in favor of joining the Union. And so territorial censuses were taken to keep track of this type of information. And at a certain point, Washington becomes a state, and that's the first time they'll have a state census as part of the federal government, but they do have territorial censuses before, and that's something you want to take a look at. And you'll see that for all of the states that joined the Union later. And so that's a helpful thing to keep in the back of your mind. You're going to want to take a look on the federal level first and see where they show up. And if we do that in FamilySearch, there's two ways you can look at your records, by records or by collection. Now what I did was I put in the search Keogh, the surname, and I clicked this box here because I want it to match exactly. I do my primary surname and then I work through the few variants I have. And the only collection that I'm interested in is the U.S. Census. And right here, by taking a look by collection, I can take a look at all the U.S. censuses, but our results show up right here. So in 1870, there's 579 results. In 1880, we have 1,066. And I think 1066 is an important year in the UK. And then we work through all the way to 1940, where I will have 2,802 results to take a look at for my surname. Now, interestingly enough, I can also take a look, since I've limited this to census right now, and realize that there's the New York State Census I can look at. There's the England and Wales censuses I can look at. There's Canada at various times. Minnesota had a state census. Wisconsin had a state census. There's a number of them. And so you're going to want to look at the place as well as the year to take a look. Scotland shows up. This is all done in alphabetical order. So you can take a look here and see your results. For instance, you'll know that you should, if you're in the United States, really be paying attention to states like New York, Pennsylvania, and Illinois. And you can spend a little less time in a state like Florida, which has one result, that lone Keogh, probably hiding out in Florida. In any event, this gives you a sense of what you can start looking at for censuses. And this information, for the most part, is freely available. Certainly if FamilySearch has indexed it, if they have the records, sometimes they have the records themselves, other times they work in conjunction with another entity. They might direct you to Ancestry, they might direct you to Find My Past. For the most part, they have a lot of these documents. We have some birth, marriage, and death information, and I could, just by clicking this box here, show all 256. Of course, my largest results are going to be in Ireland, and then we move down through, and I don't know how I forgot this, Massachusetts is going to be one of the top states for Keoghs as well. But we're going to be working through any of these that we have. Now, in another video, I'm going to explain how I approach doing my USA research, because I think you're in the best position to work with the census records first if you're trying to gather information, and then pick some of those large states to deal with where you're going to get your information that you want or follow a family. So you might want to work in Vermont or Massachusetts or New York or Washington or something like that. And if you do family reconstruction, you're going to approach it a little bit differently than if you're doing this from a data gathering standpoint. Now, one thing I would definitely suggest, and FamilySearch has this as well, they have a forum, and you can ask questions of someone who might be an expert in this area, and people from the Family History Library will take a look at your questions and answer them, and they have a British Isles floor at the library, and they have experts in each of these areas, and they can help answer questions, whether that's about Great Britain, and I guess I should be referring to it as England, Wales, Scotland, the north of Ireland, or perhaps you're looking at Irish records, perhaps you're looking at Canadian records or USA records, and you can ask those questions of whoever those specialists are. I know that I have used this facility for my Swedish and Norwegian records, and there's an individual who is assigned the task of reading those questions and responding to them, and so I've been able to get a lot of translations of my Norwegian or Swedish documents from these experts. So take advantage of that if you have a specific question, but also go to the forum because there's a number of genealogists who are happy to try and assist. And I would certainly suggest that anyone contact the people who are on the Ancestry Roots web forum, certainly if they share your surname, to ask some questions or get some information. And I would suggest you ask the question at the FamilySearch forum as well. So that's a little bit to get you started. I'm going to take you back to the front page, and this is what you see. If you haven't already, sign up for this account because, like I said, when that export button goes public, I am going to be all over it to gather my information the easier way. So there's a number of things you can look at, whether you want to work on a family tree or upload some photos. I tend to go directly to search. And if you do that, you'll notice the wiki is one of the items that you can go to. And what I did here, but we can do this just as well. Let's type in a place, and it brings back information, and you can take a look at anything you're interested in: Civil War, military records, the New York Census, cemeteries, what have you. So take a look. There'll be some general information, but there'll also be information that's very specific. So that is the wiki. Now you can just click back, having done that search, and I'll click back one more time so that we were where we were before. You can search records, and I'd browse by location. Wherever you're starting out, I always go to the location first, and then I take a look at the records. You can put your surname in. If we were to approach it this way, I haven't limited my search at all. So it's bringing back all of the records they have for Keogh. And then I can come down to collections and click on this box here, and it tells me the collections. I can also go directly to the records. But for someone like me, I like to take a look and see what those records are and then work with something very specific. That's just how I approach it. So I thought it was going to be quick, but it's about 35 minutes. I hope this helps Brian and anyone else in the UK who is thinking of crossing the pond and doing a little of research over here. I would also suggest that once you've gotten a sense of where your surname appears in the United States, then you get on the Roots web board, which is a free service at Ancestry, and you make contact or try to make contact with some individuals who share your surname, and you might want to put in your surname as well as the areas that you're starting to do your research. And who knows, you might just find a co-researcher. And more importantly, you might just find an extended relation. So, best of luck with you starting your research over here. And if you have any questions, I hope that you send those to me at my guild address, which is tessa.keo@one-name.org. That's my email alias, and I'll be happy to answer those for you. So best of luck with your research, and I want to hear all about it. Thanks so much.